The color of invisibility was a pale, washed-out gray, the shade of forgotten things. It was the color of the dust motes that danced in the slivers of winter light piercing my attic room, the color of the worn linen of my only good dress, and the color of my own reflection if I stared too long into a rain-slicked windowpane. On days like today, it felt less like a color and more like a shroud, one my stepmother, the Baroness, had been carefully weaving around me since the day she'd married my father. "Do stand still, Elara," she said, her voice a brittle confection of sugar and ice. Her fingers, cold and sharp, dug into my shoulder as she yanked at the bodice of the dress. "One would think you were being fitted for a coffin, not a ball gown." I flinched, my eyes fixed on my own phantom image in the grand mirror of her dressing room. The glass was ornate, gilded, and merciless. It showed a girl with quiet eyes and hair the color of mouse fur, a stark contrast to the vision of loveliness standing beside me. My stepsister Rosamund was a sunbeam captured in human form, golden-haired, blue-eyed, with a laugh like wind chimes. She was already resplendent in a gown of celestial blue silk that shimmered with every breath she took. My dress was gray. Of course it was gray. It had been one of Rosamund's old ones, altered so poorly it hung on my frame like a sack. "There," the Baroness said, stepping back with a sigh of theatrical exasperation. "It will have to do. One cannot make a masterpiece from plain canvas after all. Remember your purpose tonight, Elara. You are to be a quiet backdrop. Rosamund is the portrait." Rosamund offered me a small, pitying smile, the kind one gives to a stray cat. She wasn't intentionally cruel, not like her mother. Her cruelty was of a more passive sort, the simple, unthinking carelessness of the beautiful and cherished. She had never known a day of being overlooked, so she could not comprehend a lifetime of it. My father, the Baron, hovered by the doorway, a ghost in his own house. He cleared his throat, a small, apologetic sound. "The carriage is ready, my dear," he murmured, his gaze sliding past me, never quite landing. He had not truly looked at me in years, not since my mother had died, and he had sought solace in the arms of a woman who valued status above all else, a woman who saw me as nothing more than a regrettable footnote in her new life story. Tonight was the annual Hartwell Gala, the pinnacle of the social season. It was the night my stepmother intended to secure a brilliant match for Rosamund. My presence was non-negotiable, a tedious requirement of social propriety. A family must present as a family, even if one of its members was little more than a piece of unwanted furniture. The ballroom was a galaxy of shimmering gowns and glittering jewels. The air hummed with violins and buzzed with cultured chatter. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the instinct to shrink, to fold myself into the smallest possible space. My stepmother's hand clamped onto my arm, her nails pressing into my skin. "Over here," she hissed, steering me not towards the dance floor, nor the receiving line, but towards a forgotten corner of the room, dominated by an obscenely large potted fern. "This will be your little nook for the evening, Elara," she said, her public smile a terrifying mask. "You'll have a lovely view of the proceedings from here, and you won't be in anyone's way." She positioned me behind the lush green fronds, a human curio tucked away from sight. My father offered a weak, helpless shrug before being pulled away. Rosamund was immediately swallowed by a throng of admirers, and I was left alone with the fern, a silent, leafy companion in my humiliation. This was it. This was the defining act. I was not just overlooked, I was deliberately hidden, a secret shame. From my verdant prison, I watched the spectacle. I did not see the people, not really. Instead, I saw the room itself. I saw the magnificent barreled ceiling, the intricate plasterwork of the cornices, a symphony of Palladian ideals that spoke of order, logic, and a beauty far more profound than any silk gown. My secret passion, my only escape, was architecture. In the clean lines of a blueprint, in the mathematical perfection of a well-designed arch, I found the sense and stability my own life so desperately lacked. I would lose myself for hours in the books I kept hidden under a loose floorboard in my attic room, books that were my only true inheritance from my mother. As the orchestra swelled, I tilted my head back, tracing the graceful curve of the ceiling with my eyes. I imagined the stress points, the load-bearing columns disguised as decoration, the genius of the long-dead architect who had made stone and plaster soar. In that moment, absorbed in the silent language of the building, I almost forgot where I was. I almost forgot that I was the girl hidden behind a plant. Then, a change rippled through the room. The buzz of conversation faltered, replaced by a wave of hushed, excited whispers. The sea of people parted, creating a wide, reverent channel from the grand entrance. Through it walked a man who seemed to suck all the light and air in the room toward him. He was Duke Alastair Vance, the Iron Duke, a man of immense wealth and power, as famous for his vast fortune as he was for his forbidding severity and utter seclusion. He rarely appeared in society, and his presence here was like a lightning strike in a clear sky. He was tall, dressed in immaculate, severe black, his face a study in harsh, handsome lines. He looked neither left nor right, his expression a mask of cold disinterest as he moved through the fawning crowd. My stepmother practically vibrated with ambition. I saw her grab Rosamond's arm, positioning her perfectly in the Duke's path. This was a prize beyond her wildest dreams. But the Duke's gaze swept over Rosamond's practiced curtsy as if she were no more than a piece of furniture, a role I knew well. His eyes, a startlingly pale gray, continued their slow, dismissive survey of the room. They passed over the chandeliers, the musicians, the desperate faces of the hopeful. And then they stopped. They stopped on my corner. They stopped on me. For a heart-stopping moment, I was certain he was looking at something behind me, but there was nothing there but a velvet curtain. His focus was fixed, intense, and utterly unreadable. I could feel the heat of it, a physical pressure. I quickly lowered my gaze, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. What did he see? A pathetic girl hiding in the foliage? My stepmother, sensing an opportunity she couldn't comprehend, began to steer Rosamond towards him. "Your Grace," she began, her voice dripping honey. "May I present my daughter, Rosamond?" The Duke did not even turn his head. He took a step and then another, walking directly away from them. He walked across the polished marble floor, his footsteps the only sound in the now silent ballroom. He walked directly towards the potted fern. He walked directly towards me. He stopped a few feet away, a towering, intimidating presence. The entire room held its breath. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me for the first time in my life, and it was terrifying. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. "You seem to be studying the cornices, Miss Thorne," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a low, resonant authority that cut through the silence. It was a statement, not a question. I stared at him, my throat closing up. How did he even know my name? "An interest in Palladian architecture, perhaps," he continued, his gaze flicking up to the ceiling I had been admiring, then back down to my face. I managed a single jerky nod, unable to form words. He had not only seen me, he had seen what I was doing. He had looked past the gray dress and the frightened posture and seen my mind. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if confirming a thought. "This hall is a clumsy imitation. The architect misunderstood the principles of symmetrical balance. The west wing is improperly supported, a critical flaw." He then asked a question, a horribly complex question about the structural load and the viability of using a king post truss versus a hammer beam roof in a space of this span. It was a question an engineer might ask, not a duke at a ball. The words were a lifeline. In the terrifying ocean of social scrutiny, he had thrown me a rope made of mathematics and design. The fear receded, replaced by the familiar comfort of a problem to be solved. I found my voice, a trembling, reedy thing I barely recognized. "A hammer beam would be more aesthetically pleasing," I whispered, "but given the softness of the local stone used for the outer walls, a king post truss would be necessary to properly distribute the lateral thrust. Otherwise, you'd see stress fractures within 50 years. A flicker of something, surprise, respect, passed through his cold gray eyes. He gave one sharp, definitive nod. "Precisely," he said, and then he turned and walked away, leaving a maelstrom of confusion in his wake. He had crossed a ballroom to speak to the invisible girl about ceiling trusses, and in doing so, he had made me more visible than my stepmother's cruelest machinations ever could. Behind me, I could feel her fury radiating like heat from a furnace. The night was no longer about Rosamond. It was about the girl behind the plant, and the Duke who had, for some inexplicable reason, chosen to see her. The following morning, the world had shifted on its axis. The air in our house was thick with my stepmother's silent, simmering rage. She did not speak to me, did not even look at me, which was a punishment far more unnerving than her usual tirades. It was as if my sudden visibility had rendered me radioactive. Then the footman arrived. He was not one of ours. His livery was the severe dark gray and silver of the House of Vance. He carried a single heavy cream envelope, sealed with the ducal crest in black wax. My stepmother snatched it from the salver, her manicured nails tearing at the paper. Her face paled as she read the contents. "He wants to see you," she breathed, the words a mixture of horror and disbelief. "At his residence, this afternoon." She looked at me then, truly looked at me, with an expression of pure, venomous calculation. "What game are you playing, you stupid little girl?" "No game," I whispered, my own hands trembling. "I don't know why." "You will go," she decided, her mind clearly racing through 1,000 potential scenarios. "And you will not make a fool of this family. If you ruin this opportunity for Rosamond, I will make you regret the day you were born." It did not occur to her that the opportunity might be for me. In her world, I was not capable of having opportunities. The Duke's townhouse was a monument of imposing stone and stark, clean lines. It was beautiful in its severity, a building that made no apologies for what it was. I felt a kinship with it. I was led by a silent butler into a library that stole my breath away. It was not a room with books. It was a cathedral built of them. 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling shelves, connected by a spiraling iron staircase. The air smelled of old paper, leather, and beeswax. Duke Alistair Vance was standing by a massive oak desk, not looking at me, but at a set of blueprints unrolled across its surface. He was a different man here, in his own domain. The cold mask was still in place, but there was a stillness to him, a sense of purpose. "Miss Thorne," he said, without looking up. "Thank you for coming." I stood awkwardly by the door, clutching my worn handbag. I was a gray smudge in this magnificent room. My mind raced with anxieties. Was this a test? A joke? A prelude to some new, elaborate humiliation? I had learned long ago that hope was the cruelest of poisons, and I braced myself for its bitter taste. A woman with kind eyes and silver hair pulled into a neat bun, entered from a side door, carrying a tea tray. "Your Grace, I've brought refreshments for your guest." "Thank you, Mrs. Gable," he said, finally looking up. His gaze met mine. "Please, sit. Mrs. Gable will see to you." The housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, poured me a cup of tea with a steady hand, her smile small but genuine. It was a simple act of courtesy, yet it felt so profound, so alien, that it almost brought tears to my eyes. She saw me as a guest, a person worthy of a warm cup of tea. The Duke waited until she had left the room, then he gestured to the blueprints on his desk. "Come here." I approached hesitantly. The drawings were old, the ink faded to a soft brown. They depicted a bridge, elegant and complex. "5 years ago," he began, his voice a low monotone. "The new Grand Union Bridge was dedicated. The city celebrated. Politicians gave speeches. Society matrons planned luncheons." He paused, his long fingers tracing one of the lines on the blueprint. The chief engineer was present, a pompous man named Abernathy. As he was preening for the crowd, a young girl, no older than 13, asked him a question. My blood ran cold. She asked him. The Duke continued, his eyes still on the plans. Why he had chosen a cantilevered truss design when the riverbed's granite foundation was perfectly suited for the compression forces of a traditional arch bridge, which would have been both stronger and more aesthetically harmonious with the city's classical architecture. He fell silent. The memory was so vivid. The hot sun, the smell of mortar, the dismissive laugh from the great Mr. Abernathy as he patted my head and told me not to worry my pretty little head about such things. My father had pulled me away, mortified. My stepmother had not let me have supper for a week as punishment for my impertinence. No one else heard the question, the Duke said, finally lifting his gaze to mine. Or if they did, they dismissed it. The foolish prattling of a child. He held my gaze, and for the first time, I saw past the cold severity to the keen, unnerving intelligence that lay beneath. I heard it, and I knew it was the most astute question asked that day. I have made it my business to be aware of you ever since, Miss Thorne. I was speechless. My world, which had been a tiny, gray, soundproofed box, suddenly shattered. He hadn't just noticed me at the ball. He had been noticing me for years. He had seen the girl who snuck into the back of architectural lectures at the university. The girl who spent her pocket money not on ribbons, but on second-hand books about Roman aqueducts. He had seen me. All this time, when I had thought myself utterly invisible, one person had been watching. "You value intellect," I managed to say, the words feeling clumsy in my mouth. "I value substance," he corrected me, his voice precise. "Beauty fades, titles can be lost. Wit is often a shallow performance, but a mind, Miss Thorne, a well-honed mind and the integrity to use it, that is rare, that has permanence." He rolled up the blueprint with a decisive snap. "Society has overlooked you. They are fools." I left his house in a daze. The world outside seemed sharper, the colors more vibrant. A carriage ride that was usually a journey of dread felt like a flight. When I arrived home, a small, unmarked package was waiting for me. Inside was a pair of gloves made of the softest kid leather, a warm, rich brown. There was no note. There didn't need to be. It was a simple, practical kindness, an acknowledgement of the worn, threadbare pair I had been wearing. It was a gesture that said, "I see your need." It was more intimate than any jewel. Our meetings became a regular sacred ritual. Twice a week, I would go to his library, a sanctuary where I was not the Baron's plain daughter or Rosamond's drab sister, but simply Ilara. We spoke of everything and nothing. We debated the merits of Gothic buttresses versus Doric columns, the genius of Wren, the follies of Rococo. He would pull down heavy, dust-scented tomes, and we would pore over the diagrams, our heads bent close together. In these moments, he was not the Iron Duke. He was Alistair. And I, in turn, began to feel like a person, not a phantom. My voice, once hesitant, grew stronger. My opinions, once locked away in the prison of my mind, found freedom in the quiet, scholarly air of his library. I felt myself unfurling, like a plant that had been kept in darkness finally being brought into the sun. He listened with an unnerving intensity, his gray eyes fixed on my face as I spoke. He would challenge my assumptions, push me to defend my theories, not to belittle me, but to sharpen my own intellect. It was a form of respect so profound, so utterly new to me, that it felt more intoxicating than any flirtatious compliment. We were building something between us, an invisible structure forged from shared ideas and mutual esteem. One late afternoon, as rain lashed against the tall library windows, he brought out a different kind of book. It was not a published volume, but a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with elegant handwriting and exquisite, detailed sketches. "These were my brothers," he said, his voice losing its usual crisp edge, becoming rougher, softer. "Edmund, he was going to be the finest architect of his generation." He opened the journal to a drawing of a conservatory. It was a breathtaking design, a palace of glass and light, impossibly delicate, yet perfectly engineered. I could see the way the light would fall at midday, the patterns it would cast on the floor. It was a work of genius and of joy. "He designed it for our country estate," Alistair continued, his gaze distant, lost in a painful memory. "He was so full of life, of ideas. He saw beauty everywhere." He traced the lines of the drawing with a finger that trembled slightly. He died in a riding accident 3 years ago. He was 21. The revelation landed in the quiet room like a stone. Suddenly, the pieces of him clicked into place. His reclusiveness, his severity, his disdain for the frivolousness of society. It was not arrogance. It was a fortress built around a wound. He was a man hollowed out by grief, living in a world that felt gray and empty without the vibrant color of his brother's vision. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, the words feeling horribly inadequate. He looked at me, and his severe mask crumbled completely. For the first time, I saw the raw, unguarded man beneath. I saw a grief so profound it was a physical presence in the room. His carefully constructed world was as fragile as the glass conservatory his brother had never had the chance to build. "After he died," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears, "I closed myself off. The world seemed pointless. A series of meaningless social rituals, empty conversations. No one was talking about anything that mattered." He looked from the drawing to me. "Until you." My heart ached for him, for the brilliant young man lost, for the brother left behind to navigate the silence. Impulsively, I reached out, my hand hovering over the journal page. "It's beautiful," I said softly. "The way he used the cantilevered arches to support the glass roof. It's revolutionary." As I pointed to the detail, my fingers brushed against his. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot up my arm. I started to pull back, flustered, but he didn't move. Instead, his fingers gently, deliberately, closed over mine. His hand was warm, his grip firm but not confining. It was a simple touch, but it was a tectonic shift. It was a connection that went beyond the intellectual, beyond the meeting of minds. It was a silent, desperate acknowledgement of the soul. We stayed like that for a long moment, the only sounds the rain on the glass and the frantic beating of my own heart. The space between us was charged, filled with everything we hadn't said. In his eyes, I saw not just grief, but the flicker of something new, something fragile and terrifyingly hopeful. He was looking at me not as an intellectual curiosity, but as a woman. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I felt beautiful. The rumors began as a whisper, then grew to a roar. The reclusive Iron Duke was entertaining a guest. Not just any guest, but the Baron Thorne's plain, invisible elder daughter. The news rippled through the drawing rooms and salons of the city, a source of endless speculation and disbelief. At home, the atmosphere grew venomous. My stepmother's calculated silence had been replaced by a campaign of psychological warfare. Every meal was an ordeal of barbed comments and thinly veiled insults, all aimed at me. She spoke of ambitious little nobodies who overreached, of plain girls who mistook pity for affection, of the humiliation a family suffers when one of its members makes a public spectacle of herself. "You are embarrassing us," she said one evening, cornering me in the hallway after I returned from the Duke's residence. Her eyes were like chips of ice. "You are embarrassing Rosamond. Do you have any idea what people are saying? That you have somehow bewitched him, tricked him. A man of his station does not form a serious attachment to a person like you." "I am doing nothing of the sort," I said, my voice quiet but steady. The time I spent with Alistair had given me a sliver of fortitude I never knew I possessed. "You will stop seeing him," she commanded. "This foolishness ends now. It is interfering with Rosamond's prospects." "No," I said. The word was small, but it felt momentous, like shifting a mountain. It was the first time I had ever directly defied her, her face contorted with rage. "How dare you?" she hissed, her hand shooting out to grip my arm, her nails digging in. "You are a worthless, ungrateful little charity case. You will do as I say." I pulled my arm away, a fire I didn't recognize burning in my chest. "He is my friend," I said, and walked away, leaving her sputtering in the dim hallway. My defiance was a declaration of war. My stepmother, robbed of her primary weapon of control, my belief in my own worthlessness, escalated her tactics with terrifying speed. She realized she could not break my spirit, so she decided to break my future instead. 2 days later, she announced we were having a visitor for tea, a Viscount Montgomery. He was a man twice my father's age, with a wet, unpleasant mouth and eyes that roamed over me in a way that made my skin crawl. He smelled of stale port and desperation. I later learned from a sympathetic housemaid that he was deeply in debt, and my stepmother had offered him a substantial sum, part of my mother's dowry, which she controlled, to take me off her hands. A quick, quiet marriage, and I would be gone, shipped off to his crumbling estate in the country, my connection to the Duke severed forever. I sat through the tea in a state of cold dread, giving monosyllabic answers to the Viscount's leering questions, while my stepmother sang my praises with a sickening, false sweetness. My father sat by the window, staring out at the garden, a portrait of pathetic inaction. But my stepmother was not one to rely on a single line of attack. While she was parading me before the odious Viscount, she was also sharpening a second, more venomous blade. She penned a letter. It was written on plain paper, in a disguised, spidery hand. It was addressed to Duke Alastair Vance. I would not see the letter myself until much later, but I would learn its contents in excruciating detail. It was a masterpiece of cruelty, a tapestry woven from malicious lies. It claimed to be from a concerned friend of the Thorne family. It painted me as a deeply disturbed and manipulative creature, prone to flights of fancy and delusions of grandeur. It claimed I had been boasting to the servants of how I had ensnared the great Duke, that my quietness was a cunning act to hide my avarice. It hinted at a fragile mental state, a tendency towards hysteria inherited from my late mother. And for the final, killing blow, it fabricated a story of my father being on the brink of financial ruin, suggesting my entire courtship of the Duke was a desperate, calculated plot to save my family by trapping the wealthiest bachelor in the country. She was trying to poison the one pure thing in my life. She was trying to turn the very qualities he admired in me, my quiet nature, my internal world, into evidence of my madness and deceit. She was trying to make him unsee me. A summons arrived the next afternoon. It was a curt, formal note from the Duke, requesting my presence, along with that of my father and the Baroness, at his residence at 4 o'clock. No reason was given. My stepmother was ecstatic. She brandished the note like a trophy. "It is done," she declared, her eyes glittering with triumph. "He has seen you for what you are. He is summoning us to end the acquaintance formally, to put you in your place." She turned to me, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "I hope you enjoyed your little fantasy, Alara, because it is over." I felt a cold, sick dread pool in my stomach. Could she be right? Could Alastair, a man so guarded and cynical about the world, believe such poison? Had I overestimated the strength of our connection? The hope I had so cautiously nurtured withered within me, and the old familiar gray of invisibility began to creep back into my world. The carriage ride to his townhouse was the longest of my life, a silent journey to my own execution. My stepmother hummed a cheerful tune beside me. We were shown not into the library, but into a formal drawing room, a grand, intimidating space with a high ceiling and dark wood-paneled walls. Alastair was standing before the fireplace, his back to us, staring into the flames. He looked taller, more imposing than ever. The air was thick with tension. On the marble mantelpiece, I saw it, a single sheet of plain paper, the letter. He turned as we were announced. His face was like granite, his gray eyes cold and unreadable. My heart sank. My stepmother was right. It was over. She began her performance immediately, gliding forward with a sorrowful expression. "Your Grace," she began, her voice trembling with false emotion. "We came as soon as we received your note. I can only imagine how distressed you must be. I am so terribly, terribly sorry for my stepdaughter's behavior. She is a troubled girl. We have tried our best, but—" "Be silent, madam," Alastair said. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it sliced through her speech like a shard of ice, stopping her dead. He did not look at her. His eyes were on me. I could read nothing in them, and it terrified me. He gestured to the letter on the mantelpiece. "I have received some correspondence regarding your stepdaughter." He picked it up, holding it between his thumb and forefinger as if it were something filthy. It alleges, among other things, that she is mentally unstable, that she has been plotting to entrap me into marriage, and that she is doing so to save her father from a ruinous secret debt. He paused, his gaze sweeping from my stepmother's triumphant face to my father's anxious one, and finally back to me. My own face was numb with shock and shame. "It is a fascinating piece of fiction," he continued, his tone dangerously soft. "And like most fiction, it falls apart under the slightest scrutiny. You see, I had my men of business make some inquiries this morning. It turns out Baron Thorn is quite financially sound. No secret debts, no impending ruin." He let that hang in the air for a moment before turning his cold gaze upon my stepmother. "I also learned of your recent tea party with Viscount Montgomery, a man known for his debts, not his charms. An interesting choice of suitor for a beloved stepdaughter." The color drained from my stepmother's face. The triumphant smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of panicked disbelief. I don't know what you mean," she stammered. "I think you do," Alistair said. He tossed the letter into the fire. We watched it curl, blacken, and turn to ash. "I do not suffer fools, Baroness. And I do not, under any circumstances, suffer liars." He then turned fully to me. The granite mask was gone. In his eyes, I saw not suspicion, not doubt, but a deep, quiet anger on my behalf. And beneath it, a bedrock of unshakable faith. He had never believed it, not for a second. "Miss Thorne," he said, his voice softening, "your stepmother claims you are unwell, that you live in a world of fantasy." He took a step towards me, his presence a shield. "Tell me about the world you live in." His words, his trust, were like a key turning in a lock I didn't know existed. The fear, the shame, the years of silenced pain, it all receded, replaced by a clear, cold, righteous anger. I found my voice. It did not tremble. I looked past him directly at my stepmother. "My world," I said, my voice resonating with a strength I never knew I possessed. My world was a small, cold attic room. My world was being told I was a burden, a disappointment, a gray smudge that was always in the way. My world was hiding behind a potted fern at a ball so I wouldn't embarrass my family. I took a breath, the words pouring out of me, a dam breaking after a lifetime of pressure. My fantasies were not of dukes and diamonds. My fantasies were of cantilevered bridges and the soaring arches of a cathedral nave. My escape wasn't madness. It was mathematics. It was the order and beauty of a well-designed building in a life that had no order or beauty. "You tried to make me invisible," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more weight than any shout. "You tried to make me nothing, but he saw me." My stepmother, cornered and desperate, made one last pathetic gambit. "She is ungrateful," she shrieked, her mask of civility utterly shattered. "After all we have done for her, we give her a roof over her head, a bed to sleep in." Alistair's voice was as cold and sharp as a winter wind. "A bed?" he inquired softly. "That is interesting. My housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, is a cousin to your cook, a talkative woman. She informs me that Miss Thorne's designated bedchamber has been used to store firewood for the last 3 years. She tells me your stepdaughter has been sleeping on a straw pallet in the scullery, next to the wash basins." He took a slow, deliberate step towards the Baroness, his immense height and power seeming to swallow her. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet question that echoed in the silent room. "Why does she sleep in the kitchen, Baroness?" My stepmother could not speak. A strangled, gurgling sound came from her throat. Her face, a moment ago flushed with rage, was now a waxy, bloodless white. She looked utterly, irrevocably defeated. My father, who had been frozen in his customary paralysis, finally broke. A great, shuddering sob escaped him, the sound of a weak man finally confronting the totality of his failure. "Ilara," he choked out. I am so sorry." At that moment, a side door opened and Rosamond rushed in, her face pale and streaked with tears. Mrs. Gable must have told her everything. She ignored her mother, ignored the Duke, and came straight to me, her hands fluttering as if she wanted to touch me but didn't know how. "Ilara, I didn't know," she whispered, her eyes wide with a horrified, dawning comprehension. "I never knew." She finally took my hand, her grip surprisingly firm. A silent, belated act of solidarity. Alistair straightened up, his judgment delivered. "Baron," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Take your wife and leave my house. You will find you are no longer welcome in this city. I will be in touch regarding a settlement to ensure Miss Thorne receives what is rightfully hers from her mother's estate. Do not attempt to contact her again." They left. My father half-dragged my whimpering, broken stepmother from the room. Rosamond gave my hand one last squeeze, a look of profound regret on her face, before following them out. And then the great doors closed, and the room was silent. The aftermath of the storm was a profound, ringing silence. I stood in the middle of the grand drawing room, trembling not with fear, but with the sheer, violent catharsis of it all. Years of suppressed pain and humiliation had been lanced, and the release was overwhelming. I felt hollowed out, scoured clean. Alistair did not rush to my side. He stood by the fire, giving me the space I needed, his quiet presence a steady anchor in the swirling vortex of my emotions. He waited until my trembling subsided, until the world settled back onto its foundations, new foundations, built on truth instead of lies. When I finally looked at him, his severe face was softened by an expression of such deep, tender concern that it made my heart ache. He crossed the room slowly, stopping a respectful distance from me. "Ilara," he said, his voice low and gentle. "I did not do this to rescue you." I looked at him, confused. "A rescue implies that you were helpless," he continued, his gaze intense, unwavering. "You were never helpless. You were trapped. There is a difference. A rescued bird is grateful to its captor. A freed one simply remembers how to fly." He took another step closer. "I did not see you to save you. I saw you because you were the only person in that entire, glittering, foolish ballroom who was looking up. Everyone else was looking across, at who was more important, or down, at their own shoes. You were the only one seeing the beauty and the structure that holds the world together. You were the only one who was truly present." Tears I didn't know I had left began to well in my eyes, but these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief, of a profound, soul-deep recognition. He understood. He had always understood. "My life," he said, and the words were a confession, was a fortress I built after my brother died. A series of cold, logical defenses against the chaos of grief. It was well constructed, but it was empty. There was no light inside. Then you came into my library, and you started talking about stress and load and harmony, and you began to build windows in my walls. He reached out then, not to take my hand, but to gently cup my face, his thumb stroking my cheek, wiping away a falling tear. His touch was warm and steady. "I do not want to be your savior, Ilara. I want to be your partner, your equal. I want to spend the rest of my life looking at the world through your eyes, to build things with you, a home, a life, a future." His own eyes, those clear, piercing gray eyes, were shining with a vulnerability that mirrored my own. "Marry me." It wasn't a question born of passion or pity. It was a proposal built like one of our architectural designs, logical, sound, and breathtakingly beautiful in its truth. "Yes," I breathed, the word a release, a promise, an affirmation of everything I now knew I was. "Yes." He smiled, a true, unguarded smile that transformed his severe face, chasing away the last of the shadows. He leaned down, and his lips met mine. The kiss was not a fiery explosion, but a quiet, profound homecoming. It was the end of a very long, very cold winter. It was the feeling of sunlight on my face for the first time. It was the deep, cathartic certainty of being utterly and completely seen. 1 year later, the late autumn sun streamed through the panes of newly installed glass, casting long, geometric patterns across the marble floor. The air smelled of fresh-cut wood, damp earth, and the promise of new life. We stood, hand in hand, in the center of the conservatory. Edmund's conservatory. My conservatory. Our conservatory. After we were married, Alistair had brought me his brother's journal. Together, we had spent the winter months poring over the sketches. I saw the genius in the design, but also the small, youthful flaws. With a reverence that felt like a prayer, I made my own calculations, drafted my own small refinements. A slight alteration to the pitch of the roof for better drainage. A reinforcement of the northern wall to brace against the wind, all to honor and perfect his vision. Alistair had watched me work, his quiet pride a constant warming presence. Now, the structure was complete. A palace of glass and light, exactly as his brother had dreamed it. It was not a monument to grief, but a celebration of a continuing vision. I was the Duchess of Vance. I wore fine gowns, no longer gray, but the deep blues of the evening sky and the rich greens of the forest. But the title, the gowns, they were pleasantries, not my identity. My identity was here, in the blueprints that still lay on the desk in our shared library, in the quiet conversations with my husband about Roman concrete, in the solid weight of his hand in mine. He turned to me, his smile still the most wonderful sight in my world. "It is perfect," he said, looking up at the soaring glass arches. "He was a genius," I replied softly. "Yes," he agreed, but his eyes were on me. "He was, and you, my love, have given his genius a home." He drew me closer, and I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. I thought of the girl I used to be, the ghost who haunted the edges of her own life, the girl hidden behind a plant. She seemed like a character from a sad, forgotten story. She was not me. I was a woman who was not just seen, but cherished. Not just heard, but understood. I was a woman who had found her place, not in society's glare, but in the steady, intelligent, loving gaze of one extraordinary man. We were not a fairy tale. We were a well-built structure, designed to last, founded on the bedrock of truth and filled finally with light.